You are the pioneers. With your visions, your ideas, and your passion to make things better. And we are the ones who protect you from pitfalls. We are by your side whenever needed as a true fellow. Reliable, pragmatic, realistic. Together we make your product come alive. Imagine you enjoy improvement. Process Fellows.
Welcome everybody to our webinar this day. Holger Höhn will discuss the topic Automotive SPICE 3.1 and 4.0. What are the changes, and is it a revolution or is it just an evolution? Before we start with the webinar, I will say some words, a short introduction about our company Process Fellows and about Holger Höhn, and I hope you enjoy it later. So we as Process Fellows got some experts in consulting, especially in the topics of SPICE, with the focus of automotive industry, research and development processes. And as you see on the slide here, there are topics like automotive SPICE, mechanical SPICE, even topics that are not on the slide, like SPICE for cybersecurity, for example, and other topics that are not directly related to SPICE, like functional safety, project management, organizational changes, Scrum, and so on. What are we doing with those topics? We are doing assessments. Every consultant here is at least a professional assessor for automotive SPICE. So we can do internal and external certified assessments for you. And if there are gaps, we can support you with consulting, with coaching. And some of our trainers are instructors of intacs too. So we can do certified trainings with intacs courses and with courses that are not intacs related, that go far further than the intacs ones. Some organizational topics here first before Holger will start. Please ensure that you are muted during the webinar. If you got some questions, you can use, like shown here, the F&A, or in English, the Q&A functionality. We will collect the questions and we will discuss it at the end of the webinar. Or if there is a question that will fit into the slides that Holger is taking at this moment, we can use it, and I will disrupt Holger and will ask it. This webinar will be recorded, but we will ensure there are no names in the video we will upload on our website and or on YouTube later on. If in the discussion later on you will talk, your audio will be possible to listen on, but names like in the chat will not be visible. The slides will be on our website later on, maybe in a few days, but you will get a notification from us when they are uploaded. And as mentioned, the recorded presentation will be available on the website and on YouTube. So some words about Holger Höhn. He will be the presenter today. He is co-founder and managing director of Process Fellows. He's about decades in this industry. He's a long-time consultant, and he's automotive SPICE principal assessor. For this topic today, our relevant point is he's member of the intacs working group training development automotive SPICE for process expert. That's a new training coming up with 4.0, but I think he will take you into notice later on. As I mentioned, he got many years of experience in process improvement, application lifecycle management, trainings, and also he's the co-author of the book Software Engineering nach Automotive SPICE. It's German. It's in English. It's according to Automotive SPICE then, but it's a German book. Yeah, I hope you will enjoy our webinar, and I'll hand over to Holger.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, for introducing myself, and also welcome to all participants for this webinar. And I will also take over the screen right now and share my presentation. Okay, so yeah, we asked the question, Automotive SPICE 4.0, is it an evolution or a revolution? And maybe at the end we can have some idea, and you can guess yourself, is it an evolution or a revolution? I will present some changes. I will also talk a little bit what we think is the impact on assessors and also on implementation according to Automotive SPICE. And let's see what you think at the end of this webinar. First of all, some facts. So we talk about Automotive SPICE, and Automotive SPICE is not yet officially released. So we talk about the yellow draft, and this yellow draft has been published in June on the VDA QMC website, what you see here down. And more or less the trigger is that new guidelines for Automotive SPICE 4.0 will be available, and VDA always publishes so-called yellow volumes, which can be reviewed then by everyone, so it's free downloadable. And to be able to review the guidelines, also the Automotive SPICE version 4.0 has to be published as a draft version. And what we see here, it's still here 3991, so it's not called 4.0, it's a draft version, but it will be close to that, what will be published probably in September or October this year officially. So what we will present are, of course, not all changes in Automotive SPICE 4.0. That's not possible in this short time. Hopefully we pick very interesting changes or the major changes. And one disclaimer here, interpretation. So if we talk or I talk about what is the impact, it's an interpretation. We have no community discussion until now. So it's a personal or process fellows view, just as a disclaimer. And of course, after the Automotive SPICE will be used, you will have more concrete interpretations. First, start with easy things. What did not change? Of course, we are still talking about SPICE. Automotive SPICE 4.0 is still SPICE. That means we have still the two, let's say, use cases. One is you can use Automotive SPICE 4.0 for process improvement, and second for capability termination, like it was before. And also the major things like the levels did not change. So it's still based on the same ISO standard. So we have still the same 6 levels defined, from incomplete to innovating. I don't want to repeat that every detail because we want to focus on the changes. We have still the same approach that we on level 1 and level 2, we focus on the project processes and evaluate and rate those processes. From level 3 on, it goes into the organization. We have still the base practices on level 1, and we have still generic practices from level 2 up to level 5. So nothing changed here. And we have the same rating scheme with NPLF, what most of you, or maybe all of you, already know. In theory, we have also this additional rating scheme with P+, P-, L+, L-. Nothing changed here. And as well, if you want to calculate out of the single ratings, what is the level in an Automotive SPICE assessment for a process, it's still the same approach. So you need the level you want to reach. Let's say you want to really go for level 5. You need on level 5 largely or fully. All levels below need a fully rating. So there is no change in those things. And now let's go what changed. So that's basic things not changed. First, talk about the processes or the process dimension. And if you look at that, you hopefully realize that's nothing new because that's 3.1. In the following slide, you always see this blue rectangle here with 3.1 indicating, oh, that's 3.1. And afterwards, you will see a yellow 4.0 because it's a yellow volume. And then that's according to Automotive SPICE 4.0. So that was the process dimension in 3.1. And I will now go to the next slide and you will see, yes, there are a lot of changes in this process dimension. So we see here more processes available. And let's have a look at the changes in Automotive SPICE 4.0. First of all, we have here a new process group, which is called Hardware Engineering Process Group, consisting of four additional processes. They are, of course, somehow similar to the Software Engineering Process Group, only 4, not 6 like in software. But in general, it's hardware development, so focusing on electronic development, PCBAs, and something like that. So that's the first one, and it has not invented newly. It was taken over from the hardware SPICE model, which was already available from intacs. Second thing, what has been added was the machine learning engineering process group. So for artificial intelligence, machine learning, we have a new process group dealing with machine learning trainings, machine learning model testing, and so on. I will not focus too much on this part. First of all, I'm also not the expert inside, and we don't have to go at the time in this 1 hour to go in every detail here right now. In addition to this engineering process group, you see here also on the left side, there's an additional supporting process for this machine learning process group, which is machine learning data management. And we have another new process group only existing of one process, and this is the validation process of val.1. And you see it's not integrated in system engineering. Somehow it relates to SysOne. It's more or less the right side of the V model for SysOne. But if you look into the Automotive SPICE guideline book, there is also a definition, what is validation 1 and what is it not. Validation 1 really focusing on products addressing the end users. So it explicitly is written, if you are, for example, a supplier and you're only developing an ECU consisting of a hardware software part, that's not a direct contact with end user, and therefore, validation 1 will not be applied for those products. That was a definition which we were a little bit surprised of, but at the end, this is like defined. Okay, what else changed? If you look here, system engineering, software engineering is still the same processes, but if you look into the details on the right side of the V, you see, okay, in 3.1, we saw here software qualification test, system qualification test, and also these were test processes. In 4.0, this test has been replaced by verification because of you can, of course, verify software requirements not only by dynamic testing. By testing, you can also do reviews or something like that. So we have now verification, and this covers everything, testing, reviews, and what else you can do to verify something what is specified on the left side. Okay. There are other things which have been removed. So if you have a closer look at the supporting process group, for example, some processes which existed in 3.1 have been removed, sub 2, 4, and 7. And also the acquisition process group. You remember it was really some processes in the acquisition process group. In 4.0, we have only one process remaining, and this is ACQ4, the supplier monitoring process. All other processes have been removed. And for supply processes, for the supply process group, also SPL1 has been removed. Okay, that are the high-level changes. Maybe some of you are surprised because in the announcements in the past, there were the discussion mechanical SPICE, cybersecurity SPICE. We do not find in Automotive SPICE 4.0. It has been decided that cybersecurity will not be integrated in Automotive SPICE 4.0. It remains an own model. It's published on the VDA website. It's Automotive SPICE for Cybersecurity, still existing, but is not integrated, will not be integrated in 4.0. For mechanical SPICE, also the decision was a late decision. This has been decided to not integrate it in Automotive SPICE 4.0, will be probably integrated in later version of Automotive SPICE, but not in Automotive SPICE 4.0. So it's still an intacs model available, mechanical SPICE, but not integrated in 4.0. Okay, so that were the processes. So what does it mean then if you talk, I think most of you are familiar with the VDA scope in Automotive SPICE 3.1. What does it mean then for the VDA scope in Automotive SPICE 4.0? So now it changed a little bit. It's not only one fixed scope. They defined in this guideline book, you see here it's related to the guideline book, that there are base processes. Those base processes should always be in the scope, and that are the supporting processes except machine learning. So it's the old VDA scope, supporting processes, it's project management. And then they defined plugins, so-called plugins. One plugin could be system level, system engineering. Again, without sys1, so it has not been added to the VDA scope. So these are the four plugin processes for system engineering, but then we have for software, for hardware, for machine learning, we have so-called plugin processes. And if we talk about VDA scope, the definition is you should have the base plus at least one of those plugins, and all other processes, so sys1, machine learning, data management, and so on, they are optional. So that's the new definition of the VDA scope. Okay, so have a closer look at certain things. So at the first glance, okay, I talked about software test is now software verification, but it looks quite like in 3.1. We have 6 processes on software level. Did it change from 3.1 and to 4.0? Yes, it changed. And then we have again one screenshot from the guideline version from Automotive SPICE. We see here the representation again with the system software level. And what we see here, especially here on the software level, is something is not the same on the left side and the right side. On 3.1, it was like that. We have software architecture on the left side. On the right side, it's software integration testing, and everything what is in architecture should be verified, tested in SWE5. Same SWE3, detailed design. What is in detailed design should be tested, verified in SWE4. They now changed it. So SWE5 is now covering parts of the detailed design and parts of the architecture. And in addition, we have some additional requirements about component verification. You see that also if you look at the purpose, the purpose in 3.1 was really, we have compliance to software architecture, we have to integrate the software, we have to do integration tests. Now the purpose is to verify software components. So if you look into details in the SPICE model, you will also see black box tested for components are now asked for. And you have here a traceability or a link to software architecture and detailed design. So this is also reflected if you look into the new traceability model on the next slide. You see here you have SWE5, and SWE5 has now a traceability to architecture and in addition to detailed design. So talking about the impact, so of course that has an impact for the rating, for the assessors. It most probably will also have an impact in implementation because component testing was not so in focus. So that's something what could have really an impact. And if we discussed that approach also in process flows, we are not quite happy with this new new approach, because now the model was always like that. It's a V model. On the left side, you have something what is specified on the right side. Now you have to explain even more. Why is it not like that? But at the end, this is like it is defined in Automotive SPICE, and we will see how this then will work in practice. By the way, you see this is a screenshot from the ASPICE guidelines from the yellow book. You see it's still a draft version. For example, you see here it's called still test results. Of course, that should also be verification results. And there are also other things like here, they mention sub 10, BP8. There is no BP8 in sub 10. So it's still in review, and some things have to be improved, but in general, the approach will be like that. If we already here, and we talked about traceability, at least assessors which are familiar with Automotive SPICE 3.1 will see, okay, there is also something else what changed. We do not have any longer 2 base practices on every of these lines. So what happened is that traceability and consistency have been combined into one base practice. Here it's also mentioned again, because those of you which are already familiar with older version of Automotive SPICE know that it was already in the past like that. Nowadays it's like that. They have here, this is 3.1, we have one base practice, traceability, so more or less link, for example, requirements with test cases, and second thing, check if it's consistent, if everything is covered and so on. And now they combined it again in one base practice. Impact for implementation in projects, it doesn't change anything. Still, you have to do traceability and consistency from assessor point of view. Now you cannot focus anymore if is it a traceability or consistency problem, but I think impact is not so high in this case. Okay, traceability, of course, has some other aspects, and discussion always in traceability was on which granularity level do you have established traceability. And in 3.1, if you look into the guideline book, VDA guidelines 3.1, there was one chapter where it's clearly stated the granularity has to be on the lowest level. So we talk about a single stakeholder requirement, a single system requirement, single test case, and so on. 4.0, if we look here in the yellow book, then we see it changed. Now it has shows in this chapter the following. This defines allowed levels of traceability granularity. So it doesn't have to be on a single requirement. It could also be a cluster of requirements. It could be a single architectural element, but also a cluster of architectural elements. Though they changed it, from my point of view, it's more or less also a reaction to the community, because sometimes it was really something what cost a lot of effort, and with the return on invest was not so good. And now it's possible to also do the tracing on a cluster of elements. What you see here as well, of course, here we talked only about system software and changes and problems. Here we have, of course, hardware included. Automotive SPICE 4.0 has hardware covered, and we see, of course, as well, traceability overview as well for hardware. So we see here hardware requirements, which of course have then traceability and consistency to verification measures for hardware requirements. And what you see here as well in 3.1, these were test cases. Now we call it here verification or validation measures on validation 1, because again, verification measure could also be a review. It's not only performing a test or a test case. Okay, so that was the topic of traceability. Let's go to another topic, and this is output work products versus information items. What does it mean? So in Automotive SPICE 4.0, there was a new term, information items, introduced, and also information item characteristics. It replaces, I cannot say replace it, but it's in addition to output work product. So if you look in Automotive SPICE 3.1, after each process, you have a list of output work products. So for example, a test specification, and in the end of Automotive SPICE 3.1, you have the so-called work product characteristics. They have a list of contents, what is, for example, part of a configuration item. In 4.0, the representation is first of all different, and we do not talk anymore about output work product items, but about information items. And now it's also here shown as a table matrix, however you call it. You see which output information item relates to which process outcome and also to which base practices. It was in 3.1, it was in brackets. Now we have a table after each process and shows you, okay, which base practice supports which outcome. What is the idea? Why do we have information items? And there's a definition in Automotive SPICE 4.0 which says what information item is something what is needed by the assessor to rate a process. It has not to be necessarily the same what is created as a work product from the process in the project. So that means the really work product, what is produced by a project, for example, configuration management plan, that we would call an output work product. An information item, it's more abstract, and this is needed for an assessor to rate the process. It sounds a little bit theoretical, and from my point of view, the impact on assessments, on the assessors, as well on implementation of Automotive SPICE is low. It's more or less, separating the abstract thing, information item, from output work product, and it's also similar to other standards which exist. Okay, now let's come to one thing what is really from higher impact, from the rating, and especially for the rating. Strategies. We had in Automotive SPICE 3.1 a lot of strategies. So there was in all supporting processes, we had the first base practice. You should have a strategy for configuration management. You should have a strategy for quality assurance. For testing processes, you should have strategies. All these strategies have been removed from level 1, and they are now part of level 2. So if we take one example, and let's take configuration management, here you see the first base practices from configuration management in 3.1, and first one was configuration management strategy. If we look into 4.0, we see it directly starts with identify configuration items. There is no one first base practice. You have to have a strategy. And 3.1, all which are assessors or had a look at the guideline know that especially for strategies, there were really lists in the guidelines where we have here that different things that have to be included in the strategy. And if one of these topics is not included in the strategy, it has to be downrated on level 1 for the BP1. And now it's not like that. And the reason is that now it has been said, okay, level 1 should really focus on performance. Things are done. Strategy is more a planning aspect, and therefore it belongs more to level 2. And this is the reason why all strategies have been removed and now are part of this one generic practice 2.1.1. Yeah, and let's see what will be the impact, especially in rating. In implementation, most of the suppliers will go for level 2 and 3, so you will need strategies then on level 2. From the rating, nowadays, I think it will change, because now you are not really required to check a strategy in detail. You are focusing really of what is done in the project. Also for testing, we do not require a big document test plan on level 1. We directly go into please show me what are you testing, what is your approach, is not in the focus on level 1, it's on the level 2. Okay, so that was some general things, traceability, processes, strategy. If we look at certain processes, just not everything, but some general things, what changed from 3.1 to 4.0, starting with project management, we see here some, let's say, changes in how the process is designed. In 3.1, we had a lot of base practices which were like that: define, monitor, adjust. For example, define, monitor, and adjust project activities. And yeah, in 3.1, this adjust has been removed. So we see here and adjust, and here only define and monitor. Okay, they also renamed project activities to work packages, but in general, from all base practices, this adjustment has been removed. But of course, you have to adjust. You have to do some planning, you have to monitor, and you have to adjust. So where is it gone? It has been moved to ensure consistency. So we see here in BP9 on 3.1, it was really consistency, only saying, yeah, you have to make sure that everything is consistent. In 4.0, ensure consistency, and the detailed text is now, okay, regularly adjust estimates, resources, skills, work packages, and so on. So everything what is covered here is listed here, but now the adjustment is only one base practice. Again, talking about the impact, from my point of view, implementation project is still the same, because of course you have to adjust. From the rating point, I'm not so sure, because now you have only one base practice where you could, let's say, downrate an adjustment, while in 3.1, if you have a problem with adjustment and it starts maybe with the estimates and has as a follow-up problems with activities, interfaces, and so on, then you would downrate several base practices. Now, if the adjustment really is weak, you would only downrate one base practice. So let's see what happens in practice. I think from the assessor point of view, there will be some changes or some impact in the rating. Okay, so that was one example, project management. If we look into the engineering processes, and let's first start with the requirement processes, system requirements, software requirements, also hardware requirements, but that was not present in 3.1. The biggest change here is that we do not have any separate base practice for verification criteria anymore. So this was the old version 3.1, and we had this verification criteria where we ask in 3.1 always, okay, now you should think over how you want to verify the requirement on the other side of the V model. Which test method do you want to use? Which test level you want to use? Do you have some success criteria in place, or what are the success criteria? And in Automotive SPICE 4.0, this has been removed. So we do not see this anymore. It's somehow, if you look into details, there are some characteristics in specified system requirements. There is also some justification in the guideline why it has been removed. And the reason is, from the authors at least, that they say, okay, it's hard to explain why you need in addition verification criteria if you have already good specified system requirements. I'm not completely in line with this justification, but okay, it has been removed, and now we do not explicitly ask in an own base practices for verification criteria, and so that has been removed. And here in details, of course, you see also again, here we have ensured traceability and consistency as separate base practices, while we have here on the right side only one base practice, consistency and traceability we already had. And one small change, they renamed it more or less. The operating environment is now called system context to make it a little bit clearer that we talk about the system and the context of the system. And you should also communicate the impact on the system context. Again, impact on if you are implementing Automotive SPICE, I think it's not so high. You still have to care about verification criteria or however you call it in the future. From the assessor point of view, maybe the assessor cannot put so much focus that there is a weakness here in verification criteria, will be downrated here. Could also lead to more downrating because then you want to address it somewhere. You have to address it in BP1, and then this has maybe consequences. So also here, it's not so easy to judge what will be the impact on the rating. But in general, requirement process, not too much changes. Little bit more changes we have in the design processes, and then have a look at that. So for all design processes, and again, focusing on the old VDA scope, SIS3 system architecture, software architecture, and also software detail design, we have no own base practices anymore for defined interfaces. We have also no base practices anymore for allocate requirements and also not for evaluate alternative architectures. Also here, to make it more clear, one example, and let's take system architecture. Though again, this is 3.1, the old version, and we see here allocate system requirements and so on. And I will open in parallel 4.0. So first of all, you see we have 8 base practices in sys.3 in Automotive SPICE 3.1, now reduced in 4.0 to only 5. Yeah, so what they changed, first of all, you see here, they said, okay, BP1 is now focusing on the static aspects and BP2 is focusing on the dynamic aspects. Approach which I like because the reason is, of course, if you develop system architectural design, you have also somehow included dynamic behavior, but then you have a separate dynamic behavior. It was always a discussion, okay, is it now part of that or both? And now they separated it. And also this evaluate alternative system architectures, a lot of discussion always in assessments. Do I really need an alternative architecture or not? The guideline gave some answer. Now it has been included in analyzed system architecture. There are some certain aspects. I think that's also, from my point of view at least, I like this approach. And then we have, of course, traceability now together with the consistency, and communication is the same. So they changed again the base practices, how they are, the design of the base practices, if you want to say it like that. From my point of view, it still doesn't change how you implement system architecture. So there is nothing what you have to do in addition what you did in the past. It's still the same. From the assessor point of view, so for example, define interfaces. It's not here anymore. It's also part of this base practice 1. Yeah, so also here, the assessor with more base practices could, of course, more focus or put more focus where are the weaknesses. Now, if you have some weakness, you have to downrate BP1, have to explain what aspects are downrated. Also here, we will see how this works in practice. But in general, the Automotive SPICE 4 goes more in this direction to reduce base practices. I think there is no process where we have more base practices than in 3.1. It was always the direction, less base practices than in 3.1. Okay, test processes. I think we can go a little bit faster because we had already most aspects of that. One aspect, of course, is if you talk, for example, for system testing or now system verification. The first one would be the test strategy. Has been removed because it has been shifted to level 2, so it's not existing anymore. Now we have here on the left side, and 3.1, we had the test specification with test cases. Now it's more general. We have to specify verification measures. For example, of course, we will need the test specification, but we need also reviews and something like that. Now we select verification measures, we perform verification, we focus not on testing, more general on verification, and the rest is more or less the same. And of course, this is the same on all test levels. They did it, of course, for all test levels in the same way. Impact here, I think it's a low impact. Also in the past, even if we had here the test cases, I think most assessors also asked for reviews because you always wanted to see, is everything covered on the left side? And therefore, I think the impact is really low, except of the strategy, because we do not rate the strategy anymore on the level 1, I already mentioned before. Okay, so that was some things on level 1. Let's go to level 2. And on level 2, just compare the generic practices. Level on 3.1, we had 7 generic practices, more or less focusing on the plan, do, check, act life cycle and available resources and so on. Of course, it's similar in 4.0, but there are some changes. The first generic practices, 2.1 and 2.2, are nearly the same. We have the objectives to define, we have to plan, but like we already mentioned, the strategy is now part on 2.1. So, and define a strategy. And that's now valid for all processes. That means also, for example, for requirements engineering process. That could also be some change, which is an impact also on implementation. On requirements processes, we did not explicitly ask for strategy in 3.1. Now it's required because it's a generic practice for all processes to define a strategy. If you go on, we have 2.1.3. So monitor and adjust is now at the moment not visible here. Next one is determines the resource needs. They rearranged something because planning does not only mean I need to estimate, I have to define activities. I need also to determine which resources do I need. So what skills do I need, for example? And I have also to make available those resources. So this relates to these 2.1.5 and 2.1.6 here in the old version. A little bit mixed, but still the same focus. And then 2.1.5 is monitor and adjust. So the reason is these things are aspects of planning, and therefore they put it as 1.3 and 1.4, and then 1.5 is monitor and adjust. So they combined those two generic practices, monitor and adjust the performance, to one generic practice. And then we have the interfaces still existing. So we have only 6 generic practices in comparison to 7 on 3.1. And on the second part on level 2, there were no major changes. So if we talk about work product management, requirements for work products like templates, checklists, identify control work products and reviews, there were no major changes between 3.1 and 4.0. Okay, so that was level 2. And one slide here, I don't want to go in details, but especially for this 2.1.1, what I mentioned, and define a strategy. There is in the guideline an additional information what should be in the guideline. But this is now general, of course, because it's generic practice. It has to be in the same way for all processes. From my point of view, a little bit disadvantage from this approach is that in the guideline 3.1, you had for every strategy, you had a list of things what should be included in a strategy, very concrete for every process. Now it's more general. So for in 3.1, it was you have for test strategy, you need entry, exit criteria, test methods, and so on. It's not here anymore. Replacement would be the information items. What I mentioned before, you can look in Automotive SPICE 4.0 information items, and there should be a list what should be part of a strategy. But it's not so clear anymore like it has been in 3.1 in the guidelines. Okay, so 3.1 as level 3, process definition and process deployment. Also here, the generic practices have been reduced. This is 3.1 in the generic practices for level 3. There were 5 base practices. Now we have only 4 base practices. And they combined a lot of things into 3.1.1. And I think it makes sense because if you define a process, you will define activities typically, you will define sequences between the activities, you will define roles, and everything is part of the standard process. And therefore, this identification of roles is now part of 3.1.1. This sequence is part of 3.1.1. What they separated from 3.1.3 is you should define the required competences and then the required resources. So here we are really talking about not human resources. It's really about infrastructure, work environment, and something like that. 3.1.3 here and 3.1.4. There is no really a change between 3.1 and 4.0. Sorry. Yeah, so also here, impact, I think low impact, at least for implementation, rearranged some things, but still it's the same. You have to define a standard process with the basic elements, with guidances, with tailoring criteria. It's the same we had in 3.1. Generic practices have been a little bit rearranged. And if we look in 3.2, it is even better aligned with the process deployment. So if you go here, now in 3.2, we see here 3.1 still, and we have really for every generic practice on the left side in the process definition, a generic practice on the right side for implementation, for the deployment in the project. So it's really a one-to-one mapping. From my point of view, it's very clear. For me, it's really a good improvement here. Okay, some other changes. What we have, only shortly because we are really already close to the end. Purposes of engineering process have been shortened, so it's really focusing now on what is the core of a process. So here is an example for system requirements. There was a longer sentence talking about stakeholder requirements and so on and so on. And now the purpose is really focusing. We want to have system requirements, and this has been done for all engineering processes. Impact low because it doesn't, or no impact at all because it doesn't really change anything. It's only making clearer what the purpose of the processes is. And then going to the guideline, and here I think we have really some major changes also with impact. First of all, if you compare guideline, the VDA guideline, Automotive SPICE guideline 3.1 with 4.0, we have in 4.0 no recommendations anymore. We had a lot of recommendations in 3.1. These are not existing anymore. The rules which existing cover now all processes. In 3.1, it was only the VDA scope. Now all processes in 4.0, and these are now 32 processes, they are covered by this guideline. And a lot of things have been reduced. I just took some statistics here. So we have a number of pages has been reduced, even if we have a lot of more processes inside. If you, let's say, average pages per process, you would have your 20 here. Now in 4.0, only 8. And also the rules. The rules are nearly from the really number the same, but now for 32 processes. So we have, if you again calculate the average, only 9 rules per process, where we had about 18 in 3.1, and recommendations we do not have at all. So first, from the pure numbers, it's reduced, and also there are really some things which make things clearer and maybe also change something in the understanding or the approach of assessors. Some examples, so functional, non-functional requirement types, it's clearly stated that that should not be, that's not relevant classification or categorization of criteria for requirements. There is some reason, or we have here something which is also really interesting. In Automotive SPICE 3.1, we had these two purposes for an assessment. One could be process improvement and the other could be process-related product risk. It's still existing, but there is no difference in rating anymore described in the guideline. In opposite, it says in general that the rating of the processes should be independent. So this sentence, for example, this means that only weaknesses that the very process alone shall be source for a potential downrating. So that means I do not consider, at least this is our understanding, what happens on the left side, except of the traceability BPs anymore. And there's a rule: if a rating of PA11, P or N for process X shall not be used to downrate PA11 of the process Y. So there is no dependence between process ratings. That's, I think, something what will be discussed in the community a lot. Some things also have been clarified. Traceability. So traceability model, is it necessary that everything has to be traced via system requirements from stakeholder requirements? There is one part where it clearly says, okay, if the stakeholder requirements include subdomain requirements, for example, for software, in such a case, the subdomain requirement may be traced directly to sys1. So you are allowed to trace SW1 directly to sys1, and it has not to go over the system level. Always a lot of discussion. Now it's in the guideline that this is allowed. Also, what some other things we cannot cover in this short webinar, for example, development external to the assessment project. It's about if you have platform development, suppliers, there are a lot of scenarios which are addressed in this guideline. You should have then a look at your own. In general, in the guideline, there are many rules now added, and the logic is more or less changed. There were a lot of rules like, if this is done, you should downrate or something like that. You may not rate higher than. Now you have a lot of rules, additional rules. If something happens, then it shall not be downrated. So it's a little bit weaker. Here I have put some examples. I think we don't have to go the time to go into details, but there are a lot of rules like that, and you can look at that after our webinar if we provide the slides to you. Okay, what happens next? Now we have the yellow, the draft version of Automotive SPICE 4.0 and the guideline. We did our webinar. This webinar, we will publish it on the website. Sebastian already mentioned it. It will take some time, so please be patient and we will inform you when it will be available. We will also do additional events for that, free of cost on-site events. We call it Automotive SPICE 4.0 roadshows. We will publish those dates soon on our website. Maybe we can also publish that if we inform you about this presentation recording, and we will be able to add those dates also to this mailing. The official release of Automotive SPICE 4.0 and VDA guideline will be in autumn, so September or October. And of course, that also means the assessors need to be updated. So in the first quarter 2024, we will have assessor trainings available. I will show you something on the next slide. And of course, then Automotive SPICE has to be used in assessments. There will be some transition period. Let's see how long this takes.
Just a question, Holger.
Yeah.
We got a question here. I think that fits good in this slide. Yeah. It's according to experience, how long is such a transition period?
if I remember right, it was from 2.5 to 3.0, I think 18 months or something like that. I do not remember exactly, but I would also think that will be something like that. 1.5 years, I would expect. Okay, so go through the last slides. So for the assessor training, I think we have some assessors here in the webinar. What does it mean for you? So in the past, 3.1 assessor, to get an assessor, you needed the provisional assessor. If you want to become a competent assessor, you needed another 5-day training, competent assessor, and you needed the guideline training. In the future, you will have this process expert training focuses on Automotive SPICE 4.0. On the, let's say, old VDA scope on Automotive SPICE 4.0. This is where I'm a member of the intacs working group. And then you have to do this provisional assessor course. It's now 4 days, and this also includes here the guidelines. And then you have a competent assessor. But in addition, you need, if you, for example, want to perform machine learning assessments, so in the scope is machine learning, you need an additional training for machine learning. Or if you want to assess hardware SPICE engineering group, you need this hardware SPICE extension training. So you have to do that. For existing assessors, there is, and this is quite new, planned that an update training is mandatory. So this is new assessors. So also existing assessors will have to perform or participate in a mandatory ASPICE 4.0 update training. The number of days, I think, is still not completely fixed, but we're talking at least about 2 days plus additional days for hardware and machine learning. And this will be mandatory for all existing assessors. In addition to these trainings, and these are the intacs, official intacs trainings, cybersecurity SPICE already existing, for example, of course, trainings provider like process fellows offer additional training. So in our case, we, for example, offer Automotive SPICE in a nutshell, 1-day training, practical introduction, 2-day training. We combine this with functional safety, or we have mechanical SPICE training, which focuses on the intacs and mechanical SPICE model. You can have a look at our website to see our our training portfolio and have there a look. Yeah, and this was the last slide from my presentation. Maybe to summarize, and if I want to give an answer, is it an evolution or revolution? For me, it's really an evolution. There are a lot of things which, from my point of view, are a reaction of the community. There were a lot of assessments where also assessors really took exactly what is in the guideline, rule by rule by rule, and forgot that we have always to consider, is there a product risk? Is it suitable in the project and something? And the direction goes a little bit more in this, what I personally like. There are some things what we could discuss, what we do not like so much, but at the end, from my point of view, it's an evolution, it's not a revolution. But you can have your own opinion, and now I would close my presentation here at this point.
Thank you, Holger, for this information about the new ASPICE model. We got some questions here in the Q&A section. I think we can discuss 1 or 2 of them in the last minutes. One of the questions is according to traceability and consistency. Is there a definition of cluster available? So we heard it's possible to trace as clusters. Is there some more detail about this?
Yes and no. There is something in the guideline. So if you look into the new Automotive SPICE 4.0 guideline, there is some explanation why clusters allowed. So they're talking about, okay, functionality is clustered somehow in features or something like that. And but there is, of course, and I think it's not possible. There's no clear definition what is considered as a cluster.
So from my point of view, it will be for assessors more work to get transparency. How do you ensure the traceability? Is that right?
That could be right, because now at the moment you often say, okay, single requirement, you press a button and say everything is covered. Now, if it's on clusters, let's see how it. I think also for the organization, it's maybe, yeah, it's a good idea to have this on clusters, but how do I then implement it with ALM tools or something like that? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Another question was about the base practices and the changes in base practices. The question was, is there something like notes or hints, because there are lots of base practices changed or removed or deleted?
Yes, there are still, of course, those notes. So, and then there are additional notes. There is one thing, and it's mentioned in, I think it's in the guideline or in 4.0 itself, that the notes in comparison with 3.1 shall not be used as a requirement. They are only just notes, though they should represent examples, but they are existing. They have also been really enlarged. There are more notes, and therefore, yes, it's a good question. The base practices which have been removed are placed more or less in notes, but still notes should not be seen as something mandatory. These are the base practices.
Okay, so we got someone who wants to ask
I
a
have a
question for himself. Yeah.
I have a comment, Mr. Geist. Hello. Even you allow traceability on cluster level, at the end, everybody who joined this meeting has at the end to judge the consistency.
Yeah.
And this we have actually in some projects a problem, because maybe the traceability is you have a use case, a software requirement, and you have some test case. Or you have, and the question is, if you have several functions inside a software component, for example, at the end I have checked to review if all functions are covered with test case.
Yes.
And it's then we have maybe a traceability only on the component level, for example, or on the domain level. But I have the concrete problem. I have to review this consistency. And now for every of my C function, I want to check if the specified steps in the function, this is now detailed design, are really covered with some test case.
Yes, of course.
And now you can do what you want in your clustering. If I not find the test case, which is then checking this function, this concrete C function in my component, or this concrete requirement in my cluster, I cannot review the consistency because I cannot find the test case. Then sorry guys, I will, even traceability may be super clustered, I will download this to partly or largely.
Yes, but I think we will see in practice, because you could have let's say, small clusters, and if you compare cluster with cluster and say, okay, test cases and left side and right side is consistent, and you can prove that to the assessor in 4.0, it should.
It's not only assessor; it's at the end we want to have a product, a good product.
Yes,
and
of course.
This means if I specify something in a requirement, you know, the FUSA says make atomic requirements, and some of the requirements always very big, blah, 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 over 2 pages. Now I have to check really is all aspects of this long requirement really covered with some test. And this is the problem. So it's not a good approach to make this on a cluster level, this traceability is my opinion, because you reduce that you easy can perform your consistency reviews, that all aspects are covered. And this increase at the end the product risk, this clustering, that something is not really in the product correctly implemented, and you will increase the number of product problems. This is my forecast.
Yes, okay. I think also we can close the discussion, because I would also not recommend to shift to clustering. And I presented what is in Automotive SPICE 4.0.
Okay, thank you for your discussion. I think it's very interesting, but we got 2 more questions. One is according to the new training scheme. The question is, if a professional assessor wants to get to the competent level, for the 3.1, the guideline training was mandatory. With the 4.0, the guidelines are included in the first level training, in the expert training.
Yes.
How will now the provisional assessor get the guideline training? Is it still mandatory in order to reach the competent level?
I think there are some use cases we should have asked the intacs working group, which are still a little bit in discussion. Nowadays, I would say the provisional assessors have to do the guideline training. So we discussed this also internally in process fellows, because we said for planning next years, we have to not offer any more guideline trainings, but exactly for this use case, I think we need it, because the existing provisional assessors somehow need to have the knowledge about the guidelines. But at the end, does it make sense? This was the next discussion. If you talk about 3.1 guidelines, it doesn't help you anymore for 4.0. So that, I think, is really something what is still also in discussion in this intacs working group.
Okay, so I'm screening the chat, but I think we got the most of the questions. If there are some additional questions that someone has, I think they can contact us via the known addresses.
I think there was some question on the chat.
Yeah.
One question just can be answered very fast. Where can I learn more about hardware SPICE? Of course, you can download hardware SPICE, but you can also attend trainings. We offer trainings. There will be official intacs hardware SPICE trainings where you can attend, and then you will get familiar with hardware SPICE.
Okay, so
Sure.
Mr. Florida, yeah.
Yes, I raised the hand. Hello, Holger. Greetings from Regensburg. Holger, I was surprised by one topic, that the down rating of one process, or in particular level 2, should not influence the rating of another process. Does it mean the differentiation between project risk-based assessment and process improvement as scope has been completely removed? Because in the guidelines, I looked it up, in the guidelines, there are still some recommendations on level 2, check whether project management is properly working when we have identified severe deficits on level 2.
Okay, but these are different aspects. Of course, you have the level 1 and level 2 things. So level 1 project management and level 2 for all processes, if there is still a dependency. So this independent really focuses on level 1 things. It was PA11 for another process on P11. And this, at least what we understood, is really changed. So that is independent. You don't say, okay, if software requirements is weak, automatically software testing cannot be higher.
Yeah, clear. That was removed. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
The domino testing can never, right side of V-cycle cannot be better than left side. But in practice, the assessments suffer a lot when we have weaknesses on level 2, that it was almost due to the rules. You have to downrate BP4, BP5, BP8, BP10 of project management when there are deficits on level 2. And in the scoping, it was always a big point whether we do a risk-based assessment, so assess the overall project, or we simply look to columns. How good is project management? How good is testing performed?
Like I said, I think there will be a discussion. Because now we have the 2 use cases. They are mentioned in the guideline, process improvement and process-related product risk. But what is exactly now the difference? It's not so clear anymore. So there are no rating guidelines anymore in this for this topic.
Right. There are no rules anymore. No.
Yeah, there are no rules from my understanding. I think it's clear. So if I do a process-related product risk, you always think I do a down rating because I see a risk for the product. If I see something what could be improved, and whether I see just the process has something, I would, in a process improvement, have put a weakness. So maybe you have different weaknesses, but there are no clear guidelines anymore. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I think we got all questions. Many thanks to Holger for that information, and I hope every participant enjoyed our webinar today.
Sorry, I have a short question. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Can we start to adjust the hardware ASPICE, in your opinion?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
When can we adjust the hardware ASPICE?
The hardware SPICE is already available, so it is in the Automotive SPICE 4.0 included. Trainings to hardware SPICE for at least the existing models also started, and there was also during the VDA conference we had in beginning of July, there was a pilot training for the official intacs hardware SPICE training. So this is all available. So that's already existing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, then, and after Sebastian already said thank you to all of us, I would also say thank you very much for participating. I hope I could give you some insights in Automotive SPICE 4.0. And don't hesitate to ask questions if you have anything, and we will inform you. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Holger.
much.
For you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Danke, tschüss.
You are the pioneers. With your visions, your ideas, and your passion to make things better. And we are the ones who protect you from pitfalls. We are by your side whenever needed as a true fellow. Reliable, pragmatic, realistic. Together we make your product come alive. Imagine you enjoy improvement. Process Fellows.